think a year or two ago, I was looking at kind of, income constraints and what does that look like demographically. And I believe the income of around 40,000. It could have been 42 and some change. Could be upwards of 45K, but let's just say 40,000 for a family of four puts you basically at poverty in America. And it wouldn't make sense because if you're thinking about just housing, for decent, normal or average and even above average income, most people are spending anywhere from 30 to 60%, and 60% on the higher and 30 on the much lower end in housing, right? Overhead, maintenance for the house, apartment they're in, condo they're in, at any income level. So if you're thinking about 40K a year, which breaks down to a gross amount of like $3,300 a month. If you're thinking about that in America for a family of four, I'll even say a family of three if the child is school age, that puts a strain, that puts a burden on funds and how it coexists with living. Because housing would essentially be half to most of that gross income, right? Again, putting you on poverty because now you're mostly dependent on the government, right? You're in Section 8 housing and, relying on food stamps or SNAP WIC benefits to subsidize or supplement, I guess, the income that you're making from your job or jobs, right? So it's wild to me that, and again, the numbers can vary, right? If you're talking about a family or even a couple, right? A single person, I won't put them in that box. A single person can make that more flexible to them. They could even save and invest off of that lower side of income because they're their sole responsibility. They're a sole dependent of their own. So I don't really talk about single people. For like a couple or a small family, that's pretty detrimental, And so I think about stuff like, the average income in America. And that's for a household. That's for a family of four, right? The average income gross, again, in America is around 70,000. So that's not even double the poverty line. 40K is unsustainable, even with government dependence. So if you're talking about making just an extra 30K gross, which is really like an extra, 18 to 20K net, that barely puts you in a place where you can sustain on your own. You're obviously not saving or investing anything, and it's even hard to, set up stability with buying a home, with affording a decent car note, things of that nature. Traveling or taking vacation, you can't do that. You gotta be stuck to work, glued to work, Let me get my hand for a second. Sorry. Okay. All right. So if you're thinking about that, man, the average income is 70K for family of four, but poverty is around 40K, which hopefully that makes sense in my small, quick breakdown. So when I look at things like that, it's like a lot to majority of people can be on the brink of homelessness and are on the brink of being poor in America. And so I'm like, man, what are my options? What can I do to sustain myself even at that same income? What can I do? So when you think of 40K hitting you on the poverty line, right? Locals on Thailand, the average local in Thailand in USD, right, makes about $500 to $600 a month for a family. Locals, right? So that's like 23, 24K baht, if that, a month is decent or average income for a family in Thailand. Above average, puts you around 1,000 to 1,500 USD in Thailand. Above average, right? So that's maybe placing you in the top 10, top 5%. Don't quote me on this. Do your own research, right? Do your own research. The picture I'm trying to paint is that, something sustainable in America, something detrimental in America can be luxurious in Thailand and in other places. I'm in Thailand right now, so I'm talking about Thailand, right? I've talked about in some of the other videos and even on my family channel with my wife that, if you're making, if you have a family of, it's you and your partner with 1 or 2 kids, especially if they're not in school yet, right? Spending, $2,000 to $2,500 in cost of living is doable, right? So making a little upwards of that, right? Making around 3K, at least a month is quite doable for a family, right? Obviously, compared to the States, you can live pretty comfortable, So, and it could be luxurious, again, just depending on what you're spending it on, right? Is your accommodation more luxurious? Are you spending more on accommodation than maybe transportation or maybe food? Again, if you're single or you're in a couple situation, or you have a young child, where he or she is like maybe 1 or 2 years old, so not much feeding, there's not much travel, expenditure that goes around it. Medical is pretty cheap or affordable. So spending between a couple compared to spending for a couple with an under 3-year-old child can be synonymous. It can be, right? So if you're floating around $2,000 to $2,500 in expenses, right? Then floating around 3K, that same grossing $3,200, if you gross just a little bit under that, you can live well here. You're quote unquote top tiered in a place like Thailand, especially if you live more coastal or more north, right? If you live a little bit outside of places like Bangkok, Chonburi, right? If you go a little bit more south, but not too far south. If you go a little more inland from the, the beach or the coast, so even in Thailand, there's certain places within the country that can be cheaper comparably for the income that you make, guys. So although 40K is hard to make when you have 1 or 2 kids or a child on the way, right? It's hard to sustain, in a place like America, really any place within America, whether it's the South, North, West, especially the North and the West, right? Think about how you can matriculate that and manifest and make that income, whether it's a little bit less or the same, and think how you could, extend your longevity somewhere else income-wise, because everything from income falls from it. Your health, your well-being, your diet, your housing, your security, everything falls from income, unfortunately. So just moving, having the same, if not less income, but moving somewhere else can just transition you to a place of peace and security and longevity